Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Before we start with our today's session, an announcement. Tomorrow being Republic Day, we would not be having the Byju's Hindu analysis on our YouTube channel. Let's get started and look into our first article. The first article says Troubled Waters. What is the context? The article here is speaking about the tragic death of Indian fishermen from the state of Tamil Nadu. This article can be viewed from two perspectives. One is from the viewpoint of polity, the other is from the perspective of international relations. First, let us have a brief idea from the polity perspective. We have Article 297 of the Indian Constitution. What does it say? It says things of value within territorial waters or continental shelf or resources of exclusive economic zone to Western India. It says all lands, minerals and other things of value underlying the ocean within the territorial waters or the continental shelf or the exclusive economic zone of India shall vest in the Union and to be held for the purposes of the Union. The third point here speaks about other things of value. Fishing is also another thing of value. Now the question is, since this article speaks about regulation to be made by the union government, does the state have no power when it comes to fishing? Yes, they do have powers when it comes to fishing. How? We have to refer what is called as the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution. When we refer to the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution, we have what is called as entry 21. Entry 21 in the state list clearly speaks about fisheries, but when the state laws are being drafted, this has to be within the territorial waters. What is this territorial waters? So the limit from the baseline up until 12 miles is where the state governments, that is the maritime states, would be able to make laws, but anything beyond it will ultimately fall under the domain of the union government. When it comes to the union government, we also have entry 57, which is present in the 7th schedule as part of the union list. So anything that is speaking about fishing and fisheries beyond the territorial waters will fall under the domain of the union government. Does this mean that internal waters, let's say for example in the ponds, in the lakes and the rivers, will it be controlled by the union? No, this will fall under the domain of the state governments as well. So what we have to remember is up until 12 miles the control is with the state governments, but we also have what is called as the Marine Fishing Regulation Act. This particular act, which most of the states have, has been conducted, has been drafted with a model legislation from the central government. So when it comes to the internal waters, again it is the state governments which control with respect to the fishing. Now what we have to focus, why is that the lands, the minerals and other valuables are given to the union? That is because who protects the country from external threat? It is the central government. Who takes care of the sovereignty of the country? It is the central government. There was a landmark judgment which happened in United States of America when it comes to California as well as the state of US. So in this particular backdrop, the Supreme Court of United States of America said that all these powers when it comes to the territorial waters and beyond it will be ultimately lying with the central government and not the state government. So the constitutional draft makers, when they were drafting this particular article into the Indian Constitution, also believed since the power to protect from the external aggression is with the central government, that is why most of the powers of lands, minerals and other things underlying the ocean has been given to the union government. This is from the polity perspective. Now let's look at the international relation perspective with respect to conflict between India and Sri Lanka when it comes to the issue of fishery. What we have to understand, we get a brief idea about what happened in the present scenario. There were 4 Indian fishermen from the Ramanathapuram district in Tamil Nadu. They were out for fishing in their mechanized boat. It is alleged that they had entered the Sri Lankan water. Now there are two perspectives, one from the Indian perspective, the other from the Sri Lankan perspective. According to the perspective from the fishermen from the state of Tamil Nadu, they say that these 4 fishermen from the state of Tamil Nadu were killed in an attack by the Sri Lankan Navy. But Sri Lankan Navy also says that they did not kill them, but instead as they entered the domain of the Sri Lankan waters, they got scared where they would be questioned by the Sri Lankan Navy. Because they were apprehended, they sunk and ultimately they lost their life, which is disastrous, says the Sri Lankan Navy. So these are the two important perspectives, but what we have to look at is that this particular incident brings to light the long-standing conflict between the Indian fishermen as well as the Sri Lankan Navy. So what are the reasons behind the conflict? One is the proliferation of the trawlers from the Indian side, and also the sinking resources of the fishing when it comes to the Indian area. When you look into this particular area, we have the Park Bay, we also have the Gulf of Mannar. Why do the Indian fishermen enter into the waters of Sri Lanka? That is because of the drop in the fishing in the Indian part. Because there is drop, because the number of fishes are reducing on the Indian side, they enter into the Sri Lankan side. And unfortunately, because they are not being tracked, and even if they are tracked, it is more about livelihood means for them. They enter into the Sri Lankan waters, and ultimately they are captured by the Sri Lankan Navy. Now let's look at in detail what are the major conflict areas. First is with respect to the proliferation of trawlers. What exactly happens? We have something called as the bottom trawling. What is this bottom trawling? As shown in this particular picture, it is a method of fishing. So what happens? You will have these particular ships. It will also have huge heavy netted nets as well. So these nets will be put from the ships, and ultimately they will fall on the floor of the ocean or that particular sea. So what does it do? It catches fishes, and since it is heavy, it also has the net and it is on the seabed. What it also does, as it is being pulled, it will also take away the corals and other vertebrates and other species which may not be important for the fishing community. So what is happening here with respect to these trawlers? It is not only disturbing the biodiversity, it is not only taking away the corals, but it is also taking away the livelihood means and mechanisms for the Sri Lankan fishing community as well. Why? When it comes to the trawlers, they are able to take the fish in one single go because it's a huge net, because it is heavy weighted. They are able to take large number of fishes in a single go. But when you look at the Sri Lankan fishermen, they are poor as well. So because they are poor, they would not be able to afford for these trawlers, and ultimately they are also losing their livelihood mechanisms on the other side. So what we have is the highly exploitative fishing nets, that which has been used by the Indian fishing community is one single perspective. The other issue that we have to look at is with respect to the sinking resources. Up until 2009, we did not have any issue with the Sri Lankan Navy as well. Everything was good. That is because Sri Lanka was engaged in what is called as the Sri Lankan Civil War. There was a civil war between the government on one side, and they also had LTTE on the other side as well. So this particular period up until 2009, Indian fishermen even entered the waters of Sri Lanka. They were able to fetch the fishes as well, and they were able to conduct their daily activities without any problem. But after 2009, what we had is this civil war came to an end. Before 2009, in fact, we also had the fishing community, which was also used by the Sri Lankan navies as spies as well. That is to make sure they entirely destroy the LTTE. But after 2009, where things were settled, where there was consensus between the government as well as the northern part of Tamil region, what we had is the government started introspecting deep into the waters as well. So the minute we have the Sri Lankan Navy catching the Indian fishermen, why? Because they had started entering the Sri Lankan waters. This ultimately meant there was conflict between the Indian fishermen from the state of Tamil Nadu and with the Sri Lankan Navy. And as a result, what we have is a dispute between the Sri Lankan Navy as well as the Indian fishermen. In order to overcome all these issues, what India and Sri Lanka had established was called as the Joint Working Group. This was established in the year 2016. What is this Joint Working Group all about? Basically, according to this particular Joint Working Group, they wanted to expedite this bottom trawling that we just discussed should be completely eliminated. They also said the due amount of time would be given to the fishing community, and ultimately this bottom trawling should be eliminated. Why? Because it is causing damage to biodiversity, because it is causing problems to the livelihood of the poor fishermen in Sri Lanka. This has to be eliminated was the first clause. The second important one was framing procedures for returning the fishermen. Let's say, for example, we have the Indian fishermen by mistake enter the Sri Lankan waters. The Sri Lankan Navy would catch them as well. They would also arrest them as well. In that particular case, safe return of the Indian fishermen will have to be concluded according to the joint working group. In case they have also caught the trawlers, in case there is the ship that they have also caught, this also has to be released, is the second clause under the joint working group. The third was also about joint patrolling both by the Indian Coast Guard and the Navy and the Sri Lankan Navy as well, to prevent any type of issues surfacing with the Indian fishermen as well as the Sri Lankan fishermen. And at the same time, they had also agreed to set up a hotline between the Coast Guards to address the long standing issue of the fishing community between India as well as Sri Lanka. But unfortunately, this hotline, which should have been live, is not working yet, and as a result, what we have is these issues surfacing over a period of time. In the present context, what we have is that the government of India, because it controls the territory of the exclusive economic zone and it is under the prerogative that it has to protect the Indian fishermen, it has lodged a protest with the Sri Lankan authorities. The Sri Lankan authorities in the present scenario have set up a committee to find a permanent solution to the incursions by the Indian fishermen. Now, what we have to understand is this whole conflict between India and Sri Lanka is a complex problem. Why is it a complex problem? That is because, as we initially discussed, bottom trawling should have been eliminated, but the fishing community is not ready to eliminate it. So that is the major problem. The second major problem is with respect to the stalemate between the fishing communities themselves. Why? Because you have the unions representing fishing community from the Indian side, you also have the fishing community from the Sri Lankan side as well. Both were not able to come to a common consensus. So ultimately, there is stalemate between Indian and the Sri Lankan fishermen. And unfortunately, we have the owners of these trawlers who also push the poor men onto these fishing trawlers, and ultimately, in case they don't get back the enough catch, they are also not paid their salaries. So what we require is a political will. What we require is a consensus building between the fishing community. So a comprehensive solution would require all the parties coming into picture. We require a consensus from the central government of both the countries. What we also have to say to the fishing community is not to venture into the areas of the Sri Lankan waters, and ultimately the other means and mechanisms for the livelihood support for these fishermen will have to be provided by the central government as well as the state government. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says on Iran, it is decision time for Biden. When we had the United States of America represented by Mr. Donald Trump, their foreign policy was not in good shape. Why? Because they had issues with China, they had engaged into trade war with China, and when it comes to Russia, they again had issues with Russia as well. They had in fact withdrawn from number of nuclear treaties as well. When it comes to the European allies, who were always allies of the United States of America, they were not respected, they were not treated as equal partners, and there were instances where they were insulted as well. All this happened under the Trump administration. But the most devastating cause when it comes to the foreign policy happened with respect to the Iran. What exactly happened with respect to Iran? We have what is called as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. According to this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, we have 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, which includes USA, UK, France, Russia, and also China. All these countries came together along with Germany to make sure that the increase of the nuclear activities when it comes to Iran is completely restricted. So Iran had to comply by the nuclear related provisions of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and this was to be verified by the International Atomic Energy Agency. This was what was laid in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, so that they can actually restrict the nuclear activities of Iran. So this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was initiated during the period of Obama. But now we have the incoming of the Trump administration. Trump administration immediately withdraws United States of America from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Apart from they withdrawing, United States of America also started imposing lot of economic sanctions on Iran. So on one side, the idea of United States of America was to make sure that Iran does not increase the nuclear proliferation or does not conduct any of the nuclear activities. But the approaches to this very problem were two in nature. On one side, Obama administration believed what they can do is via the diplomacy, but on the other side, the Trump administration believed that they can do it on the basis of sanction and impositions. So these impositions and sanctions did not go well with Iran, and ultimately it decided in 2019 to breach the limit of the uranium enrichment. Why? Because in 2018 United States of America withdrew, and it also waited for 1 year, asking all the major powers to make sure that United States of America complies by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Since United States of America did not fall back onto its promise, in 2019 Iran started breaching the limit of uranium enrichment. In fact, we also have the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has also said that Iran's enrichment was 8 times the limit as prescribed by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So Iran became closer to weaponization, and now what we have is the new administration of Joe Biden. So when it comes to foreign policy, Joe Biden administration will have to deal with the rising China and also the close camaraderie of China and Russia, and also will have to impress upon European allies. But the most important of all is to deal with Iran. So what is the objective of this particular article? So the article currently goes on to say that Joe Biden administration has clearly gone on to say and has made its first move, saying that they want to negotiate with Iran. They want to come back to this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and all this will not work via the sanctions, but instead they want it to work via the diplomacy. And at the same time, United States of America's call has also been taken positively by Iran, and Iran has said that it is waiting and watching and will enter the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. But this is not going to be easy. Why? Because of the inherent complexities that which we see in the West Asian region. So what is the major problem when it comes to the West Asian region? We have United States of America and its allies on the one side. We have Israel on one side. We have Saudi Arabia on one side. So Israel and Saudi Arabia are the close partners of United States of America. So this means that in case United States of America is getting closer, bringing Iran back to the Iran nuclear deal, this will mean a clash with its allies. And at the same time, when it comes to the policy of West Asia, we have Saudi Arabia regime which is wanting to have hegemony in that particular area, and we also have Iran which is wanting to dominate the West Asian region. So what is Iran doing here? It is supporting the Houthis in Yemen, and these Houthis are one of the organizations supported by Iran, and they have dismantled some of the oil corporations in Saudi Arabia by launching drone attacks as well. And at the same time, Iran is also supporting anti-Israeli Lebanese Hezbollah as well. So these are the conflict which are in direct confrontation with United States of America and its allies. And at the same time, Iran has also clarified that if Iran is going to be part of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, it will be only restricted to the nuclear action program. But in case United States of America wants to influence its regional policy, that will not work, has been said by Iran with respect to West Asia. Why? When it comes to the proxy militias, let's say in Iraq or in Syria or in any other region, it will continue to host them, says Iran in this particular case. And apart from that, when you go back to Syria, there are conflicting viewpoints as well. Why? Let's say, for example, on one side, United States of America is against the Assad regime, but on the other side, we also have Iran which is supporting the Assad regime. Again, there is conflict when it comes to its policies. This is on the external front. On the internal front, there are Iranian hardliners who are not ready to accept the go of United States of America and the call of United States of America. And when it comes to internal dynamics of United States of America, there is opposition in the US Congress, especially from the Senate, climate which has been dominated by the Republicans. So this particular issue is a complex web of series and events where Joe Biden will have to demystify, decipher this whole process. How he'll do it, whether it will be successful or not, is what we have to wait and watch, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, in agri credit, small farmers are still outside the fence. The article here is speaking about agricultural credit. In this article, our primary focus would be whether the farmers are getting the credit. In case they are getting the credit, is it meeting the demands of the farmers? If not, what should be done when it comes to the agricultural credit? When it comes to improving the farmers' income, whether it is the central government or whether it is the state government, they request usually the farmers to diversify their crops. Why? That is because in case it is only paddy or in case it is only wheat that have been grown by the farmers, that is when they start losing the fertility of the soil, and ultimately it is the farmers who will be the sufferers. So what does the central government, the state government and RBI want is that they improve on their income by diversifying their crops. In order to make sure that they diversify, in order to make sure the income of the farmers increases over a period of time, what the farmers require is the institutional credit. When you look into the last few years with the independent India, with the number of programs and schemes, what we actually see is the volume of credit has improved over a period of time. So the sanctioned money from the central government, from the state governments and the RBI is increasing. So the sanctioned money is one, but the outcome is another. The government is sanctioning from its side, but unfortunately this is not meeting the demands of what the farmer actually requires. Even if this particular money is sanctioned by the government, this is not being reaped by the small farmers, is what is this article all about. Basically, when you look into the statistics in the year 2011 and 12, the target was 4.75 lakh crore. Now agriculture credit has reached to a target of 15 lakh crore in the year 2020-21 with an allocated subsidy of 21,175 crore. All these subsidies, all these inputs given by the central government or maybe the state government is ultimately not reaching what is called as the small and the marginal farmers. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand a categorization of operation holdings. When it comes to the operation holdings, they can be categorized into 5 different classes. What are those? We have the marginal category, where the farmers would be having below 1 hectare of land. Then there are small farmers who would be having 1 to 2 hectares of land. Then we have semi-medium farmers who would be having 2 to 4 hectares of land. Then we have medium farmers having 4 to 10 hectares of land. Then we have large farmers who will have 10 hectares and above. What is this article currently going and saying? In the last 10 years, agricultural credit increased by about 500%, but this has not even reached 20% of the 12.56 crore small and marginal farmers. So the central government is making advances. The state governments have been doing their role as well. The RBI is requesting the banks to provide loans, institutional loans at a very less interest rate as well. But all this is not being taken by these small and marginal farmers, but instead the majority of the subsidy and the institutional credit has been taken by what is called as the large farmers. So the large farmers are the major beneficiaries and the small farmers are the major sufferers when it comes to the institutional credit. Now when we look into the statistics, 95% of tractors and other agri implements sold in the country are being financed by non-banking financial companies. When it is being financed by the non-banking financial companies, the interest rate would be comparatively more at nearly 18%, or it can be more than the banks as well. But when they are giving by the banks, it is close by to 6 to 7%. But when it comes to non-banking financial sectors, they are giving it at 18%. So who are the sufferers? Once again, it is the small and the marginal farmers. Let's say for example, when you look into the states like Maharashtra and in places like Mumbai, ideally, whenever the bank is making these loans, it has to be provided to the farming community. But the agri credit as a definition is so vague that subsidized rate is also given to large companies in agribusinesses. So ideally, it should have been given to the farmers, but it is also being given to the agribusinesses. So what are these agribusinesses? Let's say, for example, there are people who are into fertilizers, they are into pesticides, they are into seeds and agriculture implements. In case there are businesses who are working on it, then banks loans are also provided to them. Who are the sufferers? Once again, it is the small and the marginal farmers. In fact, we have the new farm laws that have also come in as well. These laws again do not speak about institutional credit and the reforms that has to be taken in the agricultural sector. Apart from this, in case there are small and marginal farmers, they may also have to give security or the guarantee. Whenever you go to the banks, banks will not just give the loans. They also ask for the security. They also ask for the collateral. Only when we are able to show the collateral or the security is when banks would be able to provide the loans to the farmers. Most of the farmers in India, nearly 80%, are small and medium farmers. These farmers might not have the collaterals or they might not have the papers as well. In this particular case, they are again not provided the loans. Then the other problem is the time consuming procedure. Let's say, for example, in number of places, farmers might also work in other areas as well. They may also work in Manrega schemes and programs as well. Why? Because most of the times agriculture cannot be a source of livelihood. In case they have to go visit a particular bank, they have to take all these documents along with them, which also means they may have to let go other work as well. And in most of the areas, banks are not only situated in nearby villages, but they are located in district headquarters. So they have to travel as well. Traveling takes a lot of money, traveling takes a lot of time, and there are procedures that the banks will follow and has to follow, which is again a time consuming procedure, which means the small and the marginal farmers once again are not getting the institutional credit. Since they are not getting the institutional credit, what do? They go to the brokers, they also go to the middlemen, and these middlemen provide them the money, and unfortunately they charge exorbitant prices. So what we have is the institutional credit, which is at 6 to 7%, but when they are buying it from the brokers or from the middlemen, it can be 20% and even greater as well. And unfortunately, if they are not able to pay back to these middlemen, there are suicides that are committed by the farmers. Such is the state of farming community when it comes to India and the marginal and the small farmers. In order to overcome all these issues, the article here gives some recommendations. What are these recommendations? We have to empower small and marginal farmers by giving them what is called as the direct income support rather than going by the subsidizing credit. So this income support will have to be provided per hectare, says the first recommendation. The second recommendation is that these farmers will have to be facilitated with high crop loans. How are they provided? Let's say, for example, they have a stock, they have a commodity stock. On the basis of this commodity stock, they should be provided loan, is the second recommendation. The third recommendation is, since we have increased the mobile penetration at the national level, what we can also do is directly put the money into the bank accounts of the farmers and reduce the number of procedures that the farmers will have to go through. So since we have the online platform, since we can verify them via online portals as well, and in case we can enter into a video call mode, they traveling to a particular district headquarters can also be eliminated. So the mobile penetration should also be taken up by the banking sector and the government. The central government and the state governments will have to enter into a consensus, reform various farm issues, and ultimately reach out to all the small and the marginal farmers, is what this article all about. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the shipping sector is at sea. The article here focuses on all the concerns with respect to the shipping sector. One of the major sectors of the economy happens to be the shipping sector. It is also a sector, if we are able to rejuvenate, it will also boost the growth of a particular country. Let's take the example of China. China has what is called as One Belt One Road initiative. It has two initiatives, one on the continental domain, the other on the maritime domain. China is planning to increase what is called as the economic growth, one by expanding on the continental, that is on the land front. The other is on the waterfront, that happens to be the ocean. That is where we have what is called as China's One Belt One Road initiative. China also has its own set of disadvantages as well. How? Let's say for example, when you come to India, we have the eastern coast and we also have the western coast where we are able to establish what is called as the ports in India. So India has a huge expanse and a coastline when it comes to its waters. But when it comes to China, it has coast only in the east, and 7 out of the top 10 container ports in the world are in China. So how have they developed? That is because of the infrastructural support provided by the central government in China. But unfortunately, when you go back to the historical context, India had a maritime supremacy. And when it comes to the 16th century, GDP of India and China were comparable as well. But only after our independence and in the last 70 years, because of the poor legislations, India's maritime front is suffering, says this article. So the article here is looking at major concerns when it comes to the infrastructure support of the shipping industry. What is the major problem? First is with respect to the infrastructure. How infrastructure? There are two things that we have to look at. One is what is called as the on-sea support. The other is called as offshore support. What is this on-sea support? Let's say for example, we have the ships. This is the coastal area. We also have the ports that are developed along the coastal area. In case there are ships which are coming up, we have developed infrastructure on the sea, so that in case there are things, in case there are cargoes that are coming up, they would be able to dislodge all this onto this particular port. But what is the major issue when it comes to India is the offshore development. From this particular port, all these goods and services will have to be sent to different parts of the country, to the interlinks as well. This is where India has failed to develop the infrastructure. Ideally, when you compare the same with China, it is not only the port development that has taken place, but from the port development, the logistics sector is developed and the infrastructure to the hinterlands are also developed. But when it comes to India, the infrastructure on the offshore basis is not that good, and unfortunately, the hinterland infrastructure is not good, says this article. The second major issue is with respect to foreign ship owners who are operating in India. Whenever India has to transport, let's say for example, oil, or it has to import oil from a particular country, or India has to export some of the goods to another country, what we effectively make use of is the shipping industry. When it comes to the shipping owners, most of them are the foreigners. They also carry inbound and outbound cargo as well, and Indian ship owners are currently not present, and as a result, what we have is most of the profits are being taken away by the foreign owners. Ideally, the central government and the subsidies of the state government should make sure that we have our own owners, our own people who are contributing to this particular success, because the profits will be ultimately taken away. But right now, since it is the foreign ship owners, Indians are working for them and they are acting as laborers, says the second concern. So ideally, in the right position, it should have been the Indian owners taking away all the profits, but instead we have the foreign ship owners who are taking away the profits, is the second concern. The third concern is with respect to ministry officials relaxing the cabotage regulation. When it comes to the trade and its policies, the government of India should make sure that we speak about Atmanirbhar, we speak about indigenization, we speak about empowering the internal community. So instead of doing it, we are opening up to the foreign companies. That should not be happening, is the third concern. In order to overcome all these issues, the article here comes up with some recommendations. What are these recommendations? First, it speaks about developing infrastructure on power with global standards. Why? Because as we initially discussed, we have what is called as the seashore development, but this is not happening when it comes to the shore-based infrastructure, hinterland infrastructure. So the article here focuses on connecting with the hinterlands as well as on the international sea routes as well, so that all the shipments that comes at the port is also delivered to a particular place by using the hinterland infrastructure. The second is speaking about Sagarmala. The government of India already has come up with a policy called as Sagarmala. This is basically a port-led industrialization, developing logistic based infrastructure and also involving the coastal community so that they are also empowered and developed over a period of time. But unfortunately, the government's intention of Sagarmala is beautiful, beautiful, but this is not resulting in implementation. Why? Because the coastal community are not that engaging when it comes to the Sagarmala initiative. So an awareness and education and information about the Sagarmala initiative will have to be given to the coastal community so that these people are empowered and developed and their livelihood mechanism is increased over a period of time. Then we are speaking about Make in India initiative. When we speak about Make in India initiative, it is about making in India. So we require the local communities, the communities along the coastline to bring and bridge the existing gap for supply when it comes to the ships. So it is not only about having the foreign owners, but we have to build our own ships, and that should be the motive when it comes to Make in India. So basically, the third recommendation of Make in India is looking at shipbuilding and owing, and all this should be encouraged by the Ministry of Shipping. Then the fourth recommendation says that National Shipping Board is an independent advisory body for the Ministry of Shipping. It also has one of the departments called as the Directorate General of Shipping. So the NSP going forward should question the functioning of the Directorate General of Shipping, which is responsible for promoting the carrying capacity in the industry. So what we have to look at is not only supporting the foreign entrepreneurs, foreign ship owners, but this will also have to support the Indian owners by taking the initiative of Make in India and supporting the Indian people. And finally, we have to empower the youth population as well. Youth population is not only about identifying the demography, but it is also about engaging them, giving them all the skill set that is required. So in the coastal region, their strength currently has not been tapped by the central government and by the state governments as well. So what we have to do is to consolidate the strength of the coastal youth and make them contribute for the nation's economy with pride. And for doing this, what we require is to empower them, give them all the skills that is required so that they become the part of a larger process of growth and development. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says Sundarbans is home to 428 species of birds, says the Zoological Survey of India. From the preliminary examination point of view, kindly remember all these important pointers. The Indian Sundarbans is part of the largest mangrove forest in the world. Then we have the Indian Sundarbans, which covers 4,200 square kilometer, which also includes the Sundarban Tiger Reserve. It is a World Heritage Site and a Ramsar site. The mudflats and wetlands of the Sundarbans also act as a stopover site for all the migratory birds which also fly south. Kindly remember all these important facts because this can be very important for your preliminary examination. Now let's look into the mains practice question. Explain in detail the contributing factors which have resulted in the fisheries dispute between India and Sri Lanka. Discuss how this crisis can be converted into an opportunity by creating a win-win situation. The small and marginal farmers are in dire need of institutional credit. What measures can be taken to fix the existing gap and increase the cash flow to the farmers at a reasonable cost? So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and also come up with some positive feedback for their answers. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.